Good evening. I'm Dr. Vincent Bacot, the director for the Wheaton College Center for Applied Christian Ethics. This is our final event of our spring conference. We've had great events thus far, and we're looking forward to a great final event. Our speaker tonight, Dr. Anthony Bradley, spoke in chapel today. It was a great message about suffering. Tonight, he's going to turn our attention to issue of identity. I mean, how do we really see the other? And particularly, how has this worked out with African Americans? Dr. Bradley is associated with the Acton Institute, and he also teaches theology at King's College in New York. I don't know if you know, but King's College is a Christian liberal arts college in the Empire State Building in New York City. So it's a very, very interesting place, and I'm sure that he'll give us a very interesting lecture tonight. Dr. Bradley.
Thank you. For those of you who were in chapel, this will be far more nerdy and less animated than this morning. Thanks for coming out. I realize I'm competing against St. Patrick's Day and drunkenness. So you're telling me something about yourselves by being here. So thank you. This evening, I'd like to talk a little bit about the connection between what I'm more and more concerned about, the connection between human dignity and our conceptions of social justice. I want to introduce tonight a concept called solidarity, which historically has been a part of Christian social teaching across the board, Protestant and Catholic together, but sadly has lost a place in our vocabulary when we talk about the connection between social justice and human dignity. I have just released a book entitled, what is the title of my book? Oh yeah, Liberating Black Theology, the Bible and the Black Experience in America. And my main thesis in that book is that we need to focus more on issues of human dignity as a broad way of understanding that we're all our own solidarity and unity as human beings, and sort of switch the categories instead of reducing our consciousness in light of categories of racial oppression. So human dignity, the Imago Dei, has been something that has been important to me as I think more broadly about social justice. We'll talk a little bit about the implications of what that means. So that's in general a part of why I've assembled these topics the way I have tonight. So I really am looking forward to our conversation after I finish in a couple of hours. Can you imagine a society that oriented its understanding of human relationships around dignity, solidarity, and love? Western and Byzantine civilization have both aspired to such social spaces, but sadly failed. America may never be such a place until the social mores of her people begin to embed their conscious affections for others with the communal nature of our mutuality. We're all in this together. A human family, it is affection within the context of our common humanity that orients our understanding of justice. We treat people according to what it means to be human, made in the image and likeness of a triune God, manifest as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Our vision of love has been molested and perverted by radical individualism, the American dream, fear of pain, and the disordered love of comfort, ease, and success. Brown people, blacks and Latinos, suffer the tensions of a culture of white privilege as a normative reality in Western society because Trinitarian solidarity and human community continues to be absent as a basis of our social understanding. My thesis is that we cannot have a just culture unless those at the margins are loved and respected, not pitied, because of their dignity and our solidarity with them. Hence the question, can we love the other? Social injustice has been easy in nations because dominant cultures choose to view subdominant cultures as non-humans instead of as royal men and women made in the image and likeness of a triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Instead of human being, dominant cultures, we characterize undesirable people in terms that catapult them into distinctions that grant the conscious permission to abuse, insult, and oppress. One of the most powerful scenes during the civil rights movement were men marching with signs signifying their refusal to accept inhumane labels like coon and monkey, and asserting their own solidarity with the rest of the human race, saying, I am a man. I am a man, and as such, I deserve to be treated in light of my solidarity with the rest of the human race. The attack on human dignity and solidarity are the precursors for injustice and oppression. America's captivation and love affair with black people has actually expired. Black folk no longer are America's most favored race. Latinos will soon assume the role of those who look like them. You see this, for example, with CNN correspondents. Dark-skinned Negroes and their dialect are the bane of existence, now seen as America's lowest form of actualized existence. The preference for Hispanics and Latinos in low-skilled labor markets, once dominated by dark-skinned blacks with Negro dialect, for both economic and cultural reasons, is tenable. A new study says African American unemployment is on pace to reach a 25-year high. According to the Economic Policy Institute, the national African American unemployment rate will exceed 17% and top 20% in at least 5 states. The poverty rate for African American children is predicted to reach as much as 50%, up from 34% in 2008. The civil rights champions have thrown in the towel and traded the dignity of black women and men for government-allocated bling and guarantees of re-elections. When it was discovered that Senator Harry Reid of Nevada described in private then Senator Barack Obama as palatable to Americans because of him being, quote, light-skinned and having, quote, no Negro dialect, unless he wanted to have one, end of quote, not only was true, but it prophetically signaled the end of an era. In the 1970s, it wasn't dark-skinned and Negro dialect was not disdained. You see this, for example, in shows like Good Times and The Jeffersons. Americans maintain a putrid distaste for that which is associated with negritude. We see this, for example, in the sections of the book Freakonomics. Blackness no longer has dignity. Negritude, Negroness, remains something not worthy of human solidarity, but simply patronizing pity. The civil rights leaders and black congressional caucus members were utterly trapped when Senator Reid's comments were made public. If they called the comments racist, they bite the very hand that feeds them and is responsible in part for many of the black caucus members staying elected and holding positions of influence in Congress. Had Obama been as dark as me and not distanced himself from Negroness, he'd still be maybe in the House of Representatives, where dark skin and Negro dialect are quite permissible. If you've ever watched C-SPAN, for example. Now, what happens sadly, because of this transition, is the development of the white Messiah complex, which confuses compassion with pity, often leading to patronization. In the New York Times a few weeks ago, David Brooks explained this within the context of the racism, the blatant racism of the movie Avatar. Brooks says this: Avatar is racial fantasy par excellence. The hero is a white former Marine who is adrift in his civilization. He ends up working with a giant corporation and flies through space to help plunder the environment of a pristine planet and displace its peace-loving natives. The peace-loving natives compiled from a collection of Native American, African, Vietnamese, Iraqi, and other cultural fragments. These cultural natives are like the peace-loving natives you've seen in 100 other movies. End of quote. Must it always be the case, then, that white males come to save the day again? Perhaps this may explain the movie's popularity. There are those who believe that Avatar affirms white supremacy, the same type of white supremacy that juxtaposed Christian missions with the African slave trade and colonialism in Africa, Asia, and elsewhere, for example, in India, South Africa, and Haiti. Brooks explains that this type of white supremacy rests on the stereotype that white people are rationalists and technocratic, while colonial victims are spiritual and athletic. It rests on the assumption that non-whites need the white Messiah to lead their crusades. It rests on the assumption that illiteracy is the path to grace. It also creates the sort of two-edged cultural imperialism. Natives can neither have their history shaped by cruel imperialists or benevolent ones, but either way, they are going to be supporting actors in our journey of self-admiration. End of quote. In evangelical discussions of social justice, we see this sentiment often in the need to move in and live incarnationally, maybe by creating new monastic communities where we wear raggedy clothes and grow dreadlocks. The idea that the poor simply need the presence of whites among them. But this is not solidarity. This is often patronizing pity. It often is an example of the white Messiah complex that operates under the assumption that all that is needed is for whites to come and save the native blacks and Latinos from themselves. But what if we flip the script on what it means to be in union with those who are truly disadvantaged, and we focus in on our common humanity and our solidarity? The only way for America to move forward, I argue, is bringing humane justice to the truly disadvantaged, which is to restore both solidarity and human dignity. This, of course, begins in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, where God says, "Let us." To St. Basil the Great, this mysterious plural, that is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, speaks of the Trinity, deliberating over the creation of the human person, the image of the Trinity imprinted upon human beings in their creation. God loves human beings made in his image, and that because God is good, his image is good. God shared his own breath with us, which forms a concrete connection between the divine and the human. The shared breath that attracts his love to us as well. Nona Harrison, a fantastic Eastern Orthodox nun, nicely summarizes that Christians understand that freedom and responsibility, spiritual perception, our relationship with God and neighbor, excellence in character and holiness, royal dignity, our priesthood over the creation, creativity, and rationality are all part of what it means to be made in the image of the triune God. She notes this, that human beings, because of the Trinity, are created to be free to make decisions in cooperation and in harmony with God. We are created to be in union with Father, Son, and Holy Spirit for the good. Spiritually, we are created to enter into a lifelong process of being transformed so that we can know and love God and neighbor. The highest aspect of our spiritual psychology is nous. That's the Greek word encapsulating the idea of reason and mind and intellect. The intellect, Sister Harrison says, perceives the material world through the senses and organizes and evaluates those perceptions. Yet its highest and more important function is to perceive spiritual realities, including other people in the spiritual aspect, for example, angels and God. The transformation rightly orders our passions, our impulses, and reason to excel in moral character, to be freely obedient to the will of God. Our other non-rational faculties include thumos, which is the capacity to control our passions. It drives the other virtues like perseverance and courage, self-restraint, rejection of evil, and our struggle for justice. As image bearers of God, all women and men are endowed with royal dignity. Man and woman were created to exercise their royal status by ruling over, developing, and simultaneously creating culture. Gregory of Nazianzus says that God created the heavens and the earth and then created the human being as participant in both to unite them together. As humans, we are called with Christ to a cosmic priesthood to love and care, develop the earth and its creatures on behalf of God. Finally, Sister Harrison notes the divine image includes a practical reason that is enable all women and all men to develop creativity in the arts and sciences and economics and politics and business and culture making. Practical creativity, the freedom to use those gifts, and also the inventive skills that enable a world's economy to flourish. Economic exchange enables humans to share with one another, yet it also produces material things that can tempt us away from God. As humans, we are called to use reason to organize and govern society by implementing wise plans consistent with being made in the image of God the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. We have been given freedom and creativity to share in the divine freedom and creativity. So to treat those at the margins as if they are outside of these attributes is the basis of injustice and the molestation of human dignity. On the contrary, our desire to create the conditions so that human dignity can flourish is the basis of our seeking justice and solidarity with others. Solidarity highlights in a particular way the intrinsic and social nature of the human person made in the image of the Trinity, the equality of all in dignity and rights and the common path of individuals and peoples toward an ever more committed unity. Christian tradition has taught for centuries that a violation of solidarity creates the conditions for inequalities created by various forms of exploitation, oppression, and corruption that have a negative influence on the internal and international life of many nation states. From this develops a need for all of our relationships to be transformed into relationships tending toward genuine, ethical, social solidarity. Solidarity must be seen above all in its value as a moral virtue that determines the order and the relationships of various social and cultural institutions. This will affect the modification of laws, how markets are regulated or not, and our juridical systems to apply to all equally. Love and solidarity makes you take economics seriously so that you understand that Walmart is not the enemy of the poor, but it's things like the minimum wage and rent controls. Christian tradition has taught that solidarity is a firm and preserving determination to commit oneself to the common good. That is to say, to the good of all and to each individual, because we are all really responsible for each other. Solidarity rises to the rank of a fundamental social virtue since it places itself in the sphere of justice. It is a virtue directed par excellence to the common good and is found in the commitment to the flourishing of other people made in the image and likeness of a triune God. It seeks the other's good instead of the other's exploitation. It seeks the other's service as opposed to the other's oppression. It seeks the other's advantage. And love, which is talked about much in the scriptures related to how we are to relate to our neighbor, love is the highest and universal criterion of the social good and of all social ethics. Even our post-9/11 domestic and international social questions ought to be oriented around our love for the other. And the Christian tradition particularly has much to offer here because we understand that out of love flows values of virtue and truth and justice and reason. Human life in society is ordered and bears fruits of goodness and responds to human dignity wherever truth is found, wherever justice prevails, wherever there is effective respect for human dignity. When human relationships are animated by selfishness, the needs and requirements of others seem as one's own and intensifies the communion of spiritual values and the concern for material necessities for us all. But love presupposes and transcends justice, which must find its fulfillment in charity, in being responsive to the needs of others. Human relationships cannot be governed solely by measures of justice. That is, from the Christian tradition, both Protestant and Catholic alike, we understand that no legislation, no system of rules or negotiation will ever succeed in persuading men and peoples to live in unity, brotherhood, peace, and affection. No line of reasoning will be able to surpass the appeal of love and solidarity on the basis of our common humanity, made in the image of the triune God. Only love in this quality, as the form of the other virtues, can animate and shape social interaction, moving it towards peace in the context of a world that is ever more complex. Perhaps love and justice and solidarity have less to do with physical presence and more to do with how you leverage your love and solidarity in whatever space God has put you. Maybe it means that you become the CEO so that you can provide jobs for people on the margins by growing your business and creating more and more opportunities for employment. Perhaps you become the bank vice president who seeks to do justice by responsibly leveraging the bank's risks that provide opportunities for those at the margins. Perhaps you are the attorney who does pro bono work in a trailer park. Maybe it means that you adopt orphans, knowing that it is going to create some stress in your family system. Maybe you use your economic and racial privilege for the social good. This can be lived out in multiple vocations that are, in fact, virtuous. Maybe you're the one who teaches in public schools or becomes a physician or a musician or an architect, for example. In the end, what matters is not whether Americans are willing to do what is necessary to restore the humanity and dignity of blackness or brownness, but are we willing to fight for love and solidarity? Are we willing to fight for the conditions that create human flourishing? Are we willing to fight for love that enlists the goal of solidarity for the common good? Maybe what's profoundly radical is love seeking to drive how we understand what it means to be made in the image and likeness of God. Maybe that's radical. Maybe that's progressive. Maybe the progress is not necessarily the distribution of wealth or the redistribution of wealth, but the expansion and the distribution of human dignity. The expansion and the distribution of recognizing that what creates injustice are those conditions that prevent the other from being fully human. As long as America soaks in her radical individualism and her material adultery, the truly disadvantaged will continue to drown in our social and systematic realms of injustice. To do nothing more than pity tends toward patronization, and nothing more than pity tends toward solutions that feel good, but actually hurt the people they're intending to help. And sadly, Obama's election does not come close to normalizing the dignity of brownness or blackness or Negroness. The election of Obama does not come close to enhancing and acknowledging the dignity of Negro dialect or redneck dialect or Hoosier dialect. The problem of the 21st century is not necessarily racial inclusion, where I argue that has been sadly a smokescreen for our perceptions of racial progress. The idea, of course, is that because we have more racists sharing the same square footage, that we've made progress in terms of human dignity. And obviously, at least as Harry Reid reminds us, we have not made such progress. Because President Barack Obama, as Reid reminds us, would not have been elected had he had dark skin and adopted Negro dialect. So the problem of the 21st century is participation in the expansion of racial solidarity motivated by loving the other. And so we're back to our original question. Can we love the other? Can we see the inherent dignity in the lives and the faces of people who don't look like us and act like us and smell like us and have the same socioeconomic background as we do? Can we see their dignity? Can we understand that their injustice is oriented and defined by the ways in which their own humanity has been suppressed by forces internal and external. So when love orients our understanding of dignity and solidarity, even a man, not only with dark skin, can become president, but also one with red skin, whose people's lands were occupied, whose people were herded up onto reservations and completely forgotten about. Perhaps this radical revolution of human dignity and solidarity will expand our understanding of social justice so that we get beyond the platitudes of doing what feels good and doing actually that which is effective for expanding and enhancing what it means to be made in the image of the triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Thank you for your time. I'll take any comments. Or questions? Yes, ma'am. What's your name? Jasmine. Okay. Oh, I've been instructed to tell you to come up to the microphone, Jasmine. I'm sorry. Oh, we're recording this. Jasmine, you've been recorded.
Well, you talked a lot about the Negro dialect. Could you expound on what that means?
Probably what Senator Reed had in mind, what we used to call Ebonics back in the day. Broken English, chopped up words, slang, for example, which by the way, has many connections to the type of language spoken in the Highland parts of Scotland. And what's interesting, a lot of new research has come out. Do you know about this? That's actually made important connections between the way Southern African Americans spoke English and English that was spoken in the Highlands of Scotland. It's fascinating. Okay. But interestingly, a lot of the slang terms that don't fit grammatical norms have been characterized, at least as Senator Reed commented, and also what we used to call Ebonics back in the day, is the reference point for that. Yes, brother. What's your name? Paul.
Yeah, I have one question. You were mentioning something about incarnational ministry and
Yes.
about the patronizing pity that some of the people had towards that. I was wondering, were you saying that incarnational ministry, just the way it's done right now by its nature, is patronizing to the poor, or were you saying that it can still be used as a means of loving people at the margins?
Yes and yes. Next question. I'm just kidding. That what happens often is that good intentions don't necessarily enhance the dignity of the people to whom one is seeking to reach. And within the context of evangelicalism, with the language of social justice, and it often not being defined all that well, what you can have are people who are moving in, right, to bring sort of cultural salvation to natives in that area, not because they love them, right, not because they actually want to enhance the dignity and freedom. They actually just feel sorry for them. And that doesn't actually, what can happen, and I can give you an example of this. What can happen is it can breed resentment, because it doesn't take a rocket science to figure out eventually that people are just sort of using you for their own self-aggrandizement. It makes them feel good to be helping you, right? I was working at a church in Chattanooga, Tennessee, when I was in seminary. And this is a church, and you've seen this probably before. There'll be a church close to a housing project, low income, and they'll bring in busloads of suburban kids from all over the country, and they'll come in a van, and then they'll spend a week, and they'll do a Bible club, and do a gospel presentation, and give them cookies and Kool-Aid, right? Precursors to type 2 diabetes, okay? Okay, that's what they give them, right? So come and get some punch and cookies, and take pictures with us, right? So you see the pictures on the return of a high school student with a bunch of Native Americans or Mexicans or blacks crawling all over them, and they do the PowerPoint presentation, and everyone's really kind of clapping, okay? And it's great. Well, this one housing project, I was slightly proud of the folks that live in this housing project, just slightly. Because after about the 6th or 7th week of these vans of people coming in, the vans drove in, and they started throwing rocks at the van. And they were basically telling them, would you get out of our neighborhood? Because they were beginning to recognize, you don't really care about us. Because what would happen is, these teams would come in for the program, and the kids would be helped, but there was no aftercare. There was no follow-up. There was nothing. There was no plan to get them involved in the community and the church, no plan to do any discipleship and follow-up. They were just sort of cogs in a program wheel. So a bunch of people could leave and go back home with the PowerPoint presentation, everybody clap, and parents be really glad they gave $1,000 to get rid of their kid for a couple weeks. Right? Now, that kind of incarnational ministry, going in, being in, did nothing for the dignity of the people that they were seeking to help. Right? Now, the kind of dignity that actually enhances, the kind of incarnational living that actually results in human flourishing for those on the margins is hard and costly. And it is not necessarily programmatic, but it is long term. So it's not simply coming in for a year or two, but you're thinking more in terms of how do we begin to restore dignity and humanity for the long run, and doing whatever is necessary to make that happen, which again is costly. Right? And often dangerous, right? And you have to be someone who's decided to give, to live for the other, to give oneself to the flourishing of the other, right? And I've been completely baffled by why it is, and I'll move on and take another question after this. This is just something to think about. I mean, if anyone can explain this to me, email me the answer. I will write a book about it, but I'll give you the credit, okay? I've been trying to understand for years why it is that white evangelicals are much more open to serving low-income Black and Latino people, but to even mention that they go help out some poor white people. I mean, I was trying to convince a guy who grew up in a trailer park and now has a PhD to go back and serve his trailer park community, and he looked at me like I'd said that he should go to Mars, right? But there's something that I haven't put my finger on it yet, but there's something up, okay, where there's much more interest in helping the brown people, okay, but there's not much interest in helping people that look like themselves. They're just poor. Kind of lower income. Why? What's up there? Why don't why is it that middle class white people and up don't even like their own people at the bottom, at the margins of their own cultures, who, by the way, are most of America's welfare recipients, and without question, statistically, are most of America's poor? Okay, just a question. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
Danny.
Danny?
Yeah.
Okay, Danny. Is that short for something?
Daniela.
There we go, Daniela. Okay. All right. I was like, wow, your parents were Yes.
Well, my question was, since this series is about identity, just thinking of being an African American on a campus such as Wheaton, where it's predominantly white, and
It is?
hadn't noticed. But just becoming from middle class and moving to a place of upward mobility, going to law school, getting these higher jobs and
Yes.
everything. Me personally, I'm from Washington, D.C., and it's like, originally starting school, I'm like, I'm going to get my education, I'm going to go back to my community, that kind of deal. And as the years go by, and, most of my friends are in community colleges or, at HBCUs or those kind of things, it's like increasingly, you're talking about loving the other. Increasingly, I'm becoming the other.
Yes.
And I was just wondering if you can speak on how to deal with that as you become more and more professional. And there's kind of this distance. I know for white people, you mentioned your friend who, it seemed like going to Mars, but now it would feel like they would be looking at me like I'm a Martian if I went back. So could you talk on that?
Yes. Yeah, that's a fantastic. Thank you so much for asking that. I used to, listen, I grew up, I had the privilege of growing up in a very, very stable black middle class suburb in Atlanta. It's very, very stable, right? Everybody went to church on Sunday. We had little to no divorce in my neighborhood. Education was huge. Respecting your elders were huge. Any of my neighbors could whoop me. I mean, it was great, right? And I grew up in a black church where they would ask you at 6 years old, where were you going to go to medical school? They just assumed college, right? They didn't even ask you, so do you want to go to college someday? They just assumed graduate school. And I didn't, and so I've grown, I had all this education, went to Clemson University, which is only 6% African American and will be that way forever. Okay, it won't go up and it won't go down, right? So it'll be right at 6%. And then I went to Covenant Seminary, where I was one of two African Americans full-time in the MDiv program, right? And then I graduated there and went to Westminster Seminary, where I think I was the third African American in the history of the school, 75 years, to graduate with a PhD. Three, okay? And as I continue my education, I just felt more and more disconnected from my people, okay? My Pete, right? Pete. Until one day, I was living in Grand Rapids, and this Spanish teacher in a high school that needs to be shut down because they just socially promote students into unemployment, which means they end up in jail. She said, I have a young man who needs to be discipled. Well, actually, she said mentored. I have a young man who needs to be mentored, right? And his dad's a drug dealer, and I'm like, my dad went to work. I mean, clocked in kind of work. His dad went to work too. He was just selling crack. It was still work, okay? He was a businessman. And what was really interesting about my experience with this student, his name is JJ, so you know what race he is, okay? JJ, bling, right? The plastic joints, too, the big ones, right? All this bling, all tatted up. And I thought, listen, I'm not going to be able to just, connect with him. I've lost some of my Negro dialect, okay, unless I get mad and then it comes back out, okay. I'm not going to be able to connect with him at all. And what was profoundly interesting is that when he realized that I actually cared about him as a person, none of that stuff mattered. I mean, none of it mattered. And over the years, because it's been It's been, let's see, about 7 years now. I've been mentoring this guy. Our relationship has grown closer as brothers. And some of those peripherals that I thought were insurmountable were actually didn't matter, because the basis of our relationship is love and solidarity. And what I find is that as soon as people realize that you care about them, okay, all that stuff just doesn't matter. And what I would encourage you to think about are ways in which you can communicate that you actually care for people, that you actually love them, and find ways to validate and honor their dignity, right? So JJ all tatted up, earrings. We had little to nothing in common, other than the fact that we both like chicken. Okay, that was really about it. So we started out eating together. That was sort of the beginning. But what I found over the years, working both in suburban churches and also doing a lot of ministry in the city. I currently live in Washington Heights, which is one of the hoods in Manhattan. And a lot of people don't like me because I'm not Dominican, because it's a different conversation, but they're racist up there. But when I'm able to communicate that I care, it covers a multitude of sins. And it covers a multitude of disconnections. It covers a multitude of stuff. And this is why I encourage people to just go for it, right? So and what happens, you have to get over the fact that your own progress is not going to be maligned by being with others like this. It's actually going to be enhanced and will probably keep you grounded and honest and humble and curb your appetite for stupidity. Right? You don't need 2 Lexuses and a Benz. You right? I mean, and if you're really involved in other people's lives, you don't have the space for that anyway. Okay? But that's a very, very good question, and that's something that people, as they progress, have to wrestle with. I mean, it's one of the negative consequences of the civil rights movement, is that the black folks that influence black communities by being there, that influence left. They took the churches and the Boy Scouts, and they took all that stuff with them. And what was left was the black underclass with no social stabilizing institutions. It was kind of an accident, right? Kind of a big oops. And part of this each one, teach one, come back, it's this idea of regaining connection. This is why I love Cornel West, because he's about a love ethic, right? He wants there to be solidarity and justice on the basis of love and connection. And all this other stuff, is this peripheral? Well, that's a fantastic question. Thank you. My brother, what's your name?
How's it going? Maurice. Folks call me
Maurice?
Mo, though.
Wait, say that again?
I said people call me Mo. So you
Mo?
can be the one.
Okay.
This is also really short. Funny thing about that, when freshman year, second semester, I called my best friend, or he called me, and he said I sound like a white girl. So
A white girl?
Yes, not a white guy, a white girl.
Oh.
Because of how much
Maybe
my
you should
voice-
talk with a deeper voice.
Yeah, but I thought that was interesting. But my question has to do kind of with the question before that.
Yeah.
Dealing with incarnational ministry.
Yeah.
This week, I just came back from a tour in California. And one of the interesting things that happened was we went to Skid Row, which is great. I mean, I plan on moving back to the neighborhood I grew up in, Memphis, and doing incarnational ministry, but living there, and not just kind of coming for a day. And actually, when people come for a day, it really irritates me. And what we did in Skid Row was go for a day. And that made me really, really angry. Really, really angry. And I was there, and I was a part of something I felt like that was wrong. I felt like we're here, we're doing this thing. First of all, we were dressed up. All of us had blue shirts on, put it like that. We were in California. So you had 60 people walking around in Skid Row with blue shirts on. It's probably not the best idea. And we were there, and I was frustrated and I was angry that I was there. And I was talking to people trying to get a vision kind of what God was saying to other people and why we were there and why this was happening and what was God planning on doing and why did he have me in this place that I knew was a bad idea to be there for one day, kind of see people share the gospel with them like they didn't already have Jesus and then leave. And surprisingly, which is kind of what God does, he used it. God blessed and he moved. And we just kind of worked around the building. We just did work for them in the building and didn't really do much of like evangelizing. Sure. So it was a blessing, and I'm glad that God moved. But one of the problems that came up when discussing it with a couple other social majors and minors is that one of the best ways for people to get an understanding of what's going on in the city and the inequality that's there is bringing them there. And so as someone who grew up in that environment and who is exposed to it and whose family kind of does that type of stuff, I'm used to it and I already have the privilege of knowing about this type of thing. But for people who grow up necessarily in the suburbs or anywhere really and haven't been exposed to this, one of the best ways for them to be exposed is to go there, see it, and create relationship with people there and see that people who are real human beings are in pain, are being neglected, and are being mistreated.
Right.
And I couldn't think of a better way to do it. I mean, I knew that this was a bad idea, but I couldn't think of another better idea to replace the bad idea.
Sure.
So I was just saying, what?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the question you want to ask is, what is going to make that exposure effective and sustainable over the long term? Okay. What happens often is, and this happens for people. I mean, I travel the planet a lot, right? So you go to a country, you get sort of overwhelmed by poverty, and it kind of remains a part of your mental history. And then 2 months later, you're at the club again, just chilling, kicking it, right? And you don't really think about it all that much. It might come up again. But what would it mean, or what has to happen to make not just exposure affect you, but repeated exposures, right? We want it to be effective and sustainable. So we have to construct it in a way. We have to get beyond exposure as a goal, right? I mean, that's what these churches were doing the church was doing in Chattanooga, which was good as far as it went, right? But it really wasn't helping the people that they thought they were helping. And the real effect was sort of this one-time shock, right? I mean, I think about it another way. There are lots of people who are in a crisis, and they pray to God, God, if you get me out of this crisis, I will live for you forever. Lord, just get me out of this one, okay? And then they get out of it, and 6 months later, same deal, right? So we have to get beyond thinking that exposure is enough and begin to creatively come up with strategies to make that, to have that exposure create long-term effective results in people. I mean, to really affect them over time is probably not exposing them once. But let's say, for example, if the team that went to this prison did it on a, monthly or bi-monthly basis the whole time you were here, right? What happens then, it can actually change your sense of vocation when you get exposed that much, right? It's been my repeated trips to Guatemala, the same country, same neighborhood over the years, that's transformed my understanding of justice issues in Central America. It wasn't a one time, it was the repeated times. So you want to get people exposed again and again and again and again, because it develops a different habits of understanding that form you over the long haul, right? Think about it this way. Do you need to hear the gospel once? You need to hear it a lot, because we forget. Right? It's kind of human nature. That's a very good question. I mean, and you shouldn't have. You shouldn't have felt bad, because it was good to be exposed, but it was very limited in terms of its effect. And that's where your frustration is good, and that's where we need more creativity? Fantastic question. Yes, brother.
Hi, my name's Jeremy. I met you earlier after
Yeah,
chapel.
yeah.
So thanks for your presentation. It was quite informative. We had a gentleman named Dr. Eddie Glaude here, who's a professor of African American history and religion at Princeton University. And he said that one's identity is only questioned when it is menaced. And I would agree with that statement, because I think that when one expresses himself racially in such a way that inhibits another person's expression racially, or somehow offends another person, or it kind of creates some dissonance in society, that doesn't really have people on the outside looking in view those people as people of great dignity. But my question is, do you believe that, I'll just use my own race as an example, that for me to express myself racially leads other people, namely the majority, to see me as a person of dignity? In other words, if I learn more about myself and my culture and my history, and I learn how to express that in a way that's not menaced, that's not at all disruptive of other people, will that thereby lead others to view me as a person of dignity?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little more comfortable with our expressions disrupting each other just a little bit.
Okay.
Because at least as I understand it, it's one way for us to be challenged to appreciate something in another expression that we might not be otherwise. I mean, that's how we're challenged to do that, is that we have to consider, it forces us to consider the humanity of that expression. We can't ignore it because it's rubbing us wrong. And what it can do, it can actually have the fantastic result of disclosing our own biases. It's sort of exposing some of the ways in which I'll finish the sentence. It actually can expose some of the ways that we haven't been honest about our openness. Because what happens is this, right? We often we give other races and other cultural groups space to be themselves, as long as it doesn't bother us. So if it's contained over here, okay, if it's put over here in that part of the room, or that part of the city, or that part of the country, or wherever that is, that's fine. But when it starts to leak out and affect, and that's when people want to raise flags. I'm perfectly comfortable with the idea that we sharpen each other by having some of those ways be a part of while we talk about, serve as much of the content of why we have to talk about our solidarity. That is, even though we're different, even though this rubs us wrong, we have to look beyond those things and understand our common humanity, right? So I'm a little okay with it. Professor Glaude, you said he at the end. Did you say menace? Was it?
He said our identity is only questioned if it is menaced.
Yeah, and I would even press it further and say our identity can also be questioned when we're just ignored, which I think is worse, right? You're not even considered being. I mean, you're not even worth thinking about, right? You're just kind of an afterthought, maybe. An afterthought's afterthought. I think that's far worse than actually engaging in some tension. Tension's really healthy. It actually can be quite good. Maybe I'm a revolutionary and a little nuts, which I kind of am, but I don't mind the dialogue and the engagement that's brought by expression. So I want people's Irishness, or their Northeasternness, or their Texanness, or whatever it is that they got. I want all of that to come out, and for us to have to wrestle together with what makes us, what makes us have dignity and have solidarity with each other, to appreciate those and let it be what it be. And here's why. And I have a weird twist on this verse in Revelation that a lot of people in the racial reconciliation movement don't like, okay? But it's okay for them not to like it. They'll get over it. This idea that every tribe and tongue, you know that verse, right? Every tribe and tongue. I don't necessarily see that as every tribe and tongue in terms of color blindness and no distinction. I think that there'll be intact tribes and tongues worshiping together, but they won't care about the fact that the other tribe is the other tribe and the other tongue is the other tongue. I don't necessarily see why it has to be that some distinctions will be obliterated. So I often joke about the fact that in heaven I fully plan on being bouncing around different sections, right? I'll be with the Latinos dancing salsa over there, right? And I'll be, listening to some glorified Marvin Gaye with my brothers. I'll be in different, because every tribe and tongue will be together in ways that we can't be here. And so I don't think that those distinctions are necessarily, the tensions that those distinctions bring are necessarily bad for us right now. Good question. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name's Katie Lyons.
Katie?
Yeah, Katie.
Okay.
I was wondering how we try not to become the white messiah in
Yes.
doing things like adopting kids and doing pro bono work, because I recently saw the movie The Blind Side. I don't know if you
Yes.
saw it.
Yeah.
And that was an issue that was kind of brought up, especially
Sure.
when she was talking with her other friends at that table.
Sure.
And they were like, oh,
Sure.
you're doing a great thing. That's awesome. And you could just hear the pity that was coming out of their mouths. And she was trying to explain that he was doing more for them by being in their house
Sure.
than she was actually doing for him. So how do we balance that, not being the white messiah, yet still doing something for other people? A lot of it looks superficial. So how do we show the love
Sure.
and the compassion that we have instead of the pity that other people might?
Sure. No,
intend to
that's a
see?
great question. I mean, I for one did not see the Blind Side as a movie that perpetuated this white messiah idea. I mean, if you know the story, I don't know how you could because it was all over the place. If you know the story, it was a providential meeting. Mm-hmm. Right? The people that just happen to be of different cultures. It wasn't like, we need to go find a black kid.
Yeah.
Okay? And save it.
Yeah.
Okay? And that to me is where the white messiahness comes in, is that we the ones that are normal and good and healthy and have it all together, we need to go find a savage. Right? Some brown savage somewhere on the planet and make them like us. Right? Because we're awesome. That's a different attitude. Right? Oh, those poor little monks. I mean, look at them. They just don't have any culture. Right? Okay. Look at them without their culture. Right? So we need to bring them in to teach them how to make, broccoli casseroles and stuff like that. Okay, with cheese. That to me is completely different. Of course, these things involve a motive, and it's important. I would argue to look at long-term expressions of consistency. That is, do you only show compassion for a certain group? I mean, are you a person that shows compassion no matter what? Or is it directed specifically at a certain group of people? Okay, and if so, why? Right? So the one day I was livid. I mean, I was at this church and I didn't cuss, but I came close. Okay? Because I was in this really low income area that had some poor white people that couldn't afford to participate in the white flight and the black flight that had happened in the neighborhood. And I brought to this church this white kid, 16 years old, broken family. I mean, crazy stuff going on in his house. And he told me that his dream, high school dream, was to have some people clap for him at graduation. That's all he wanted. Because he knew that his pathetic family, right, as he described it, were not even going to show up to his high school graduation. Right? So I went back to this church that is all about justice and told them this story about, hey, there's this kid. He just wants people to be at graduation to clap when people say his name. That's it, right? They ignored him. They just completely ignored him. But if he had been a black kid, right, they would have been, I saw it, they would have been all over. They would have announced it at church, okay, and had people show up with horns and all this other kind of stuff, right? So if you're a person of justice and compassion and mercy like Jesus is, you're not going to have preferential groups, right? And that's a challenge for everybody. I mean, I sort of have this, I know this is crazy, okay? But I'm so radically, I'm so radical about this idea of solidarity and dignity. I would love, this would be fantastic. I would love for a group of upper class black people to go help out a white trailer park. I would love that, right? That is this idea of no matter what. Now you know if you're white, no matter what you do, people are going to hate you, right? White people get criticized for doing it and not doing it, right? If they do it, they're a bunch of racists. They're just patronizing. If they don't do it, they're a bunch of racists. They don't care. They're just, right? Right? So you're going to get it anyway, right? So it really doesn't matter, but it's more important for yourself and your own heart to really be consistent and to be a person of compassion, whether it's someone white, black, fat, tall, short, whatever, and let other people deal with it. Let them wrestle with what you're doing and you just can't care. Okay. Just can't care about it. Thank you. Good question. Yes, sir.
My name is David, and I'm a sophomore here. And also, I watched you on Glenn Beck, and
yes.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, and also, you're talking about black liberation theology. How does it have a negative impact on the African American community? And also, does it contrast with Orthodox Christian theology in many ways?
You asked, what impact does it have, and how is it? Oh, does it contrast?
Orthodox theology, as in Orthodox Christian teaching.
Sure. Yeah.
As a
contrast. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The bottom line there is that what Black liberation theologians did is, of course, talk about racial injustice a lot. And I argue that one of the things that happened that became unfortunate over time is that black consciousness became singly identified with being oppressed by white people, right? That your blackness is identified by your oppression. And so white oppression becomes the primary narrative through which you understand everything about your life, right? It becomes the interpretive narrative, okay? So if you're taking a class, the white professor, you get a B. Why'd you get a B? Because he's racist, right? Why'd it get cut off on the road? Because the person's racist. It's a racial identity. I argue that it's actually more important to think about social injustice in terms of what it means to be made in the image and likeness of God. Because substandard education is injustice not because they're black, but because they're human, right? And because they're made in the image and likeness of God, because they've been given nous and thomos, to not enhance their intelligence, their reason is to dehumanize them. Not because they're black, it's because they're human. So you can be someone of the same race and dehumanize your own people. You don't have to be, it doesn't require one to be outside one's race to be an agent of injustice. And there's a whole lot of folks, white, black, and yellow, and brown, who have committed acts of social injustice against their own people because they weren't treating them as human. We create new words for them, ghetto and trash and whatever. In terms of the Orthodox theology, what happened, and this is a really short answer to a really, really long answer. Basically, I argue that some of the fundamentals in terms of understanding the breadth of the gospel, in terms of the church's prophetic witness to both structural sin, which they focus on, but also personal sin, it actually gets left behind. Some of the personal issues, a lot of focus on structural issues, a lot of structural injustice that we see in Isaiah, but leaves behind some of the personal transformation that actually affects the social structures. So think, topics like sin and redemption, some of the moral prescriptions in terms of how people use their bodies, things like that. That'd be some of the ways that it contrasts. But it's consistent, though, in terms of speaking morally against structural injustice and how that can create context for inhumane treatment of other people.
So you're basically saying it doesn't contrast the vertical relationship between you and God, basically, right?
Vertical and horizontal, it's both and, right? If you're suffering from, when your husband leaves you, okay, political theology didn't really help you. Okay, when you have cancer, talking about white oppression doesn't help you deal with your cancer. But it does help you understand some of the history in this country and white supremacy and the curse of Ham and all that stuff. Why Puritans were chaplains on slave ships. Why Jonathan Edwards was a slave owner and white people don't like to talk about that. Things like that. Okay, it helps deal with these things like that. But it doesn't spill into some of the other issues that were part of the black church traditionally, right? It was an over-focus on something that was a gap in general in theology, and they sort of sought to address that. It's not all bad, right? I got a book out of it.
I'm Allison.
Hey, Allison.
And I'm an economics major, so I'm always interested in policy questions.
Yes.
And we haven't talked much about that, and I was just wondering, I don't know what you think about the church and its if it should use politics as an avenue for change at all. But I was wondering if you think that the church should be involved and be speaking up as far as what government should be doing. Do you think that there are policies that have been enacted in the past that have worked against embracing and expanding the dignity of everyone? And what types of policies do you think would expand human dignity?
Sure. Good question. Good questions. I would argue that of course the church has a role. I mean, the church actually has more of a I hate to use the word transcendent. The church, I don't want to say apolitical, but that's sort of where I'm leaning. The church has a role to play in terms of stepping out of all of the political battles in terms of policy, and to really press these principles of human dignity and solidarity and human flourishing, and to recognize that there are real prudential judgments that have to occur in terms of how we think about what's best, okay, and what's effective over the long haul. When the church doesn't speak, or where the church hasn't spoken, the public consciousness isn't really challenged to think about its own relationship to people, right? And, sadly, evangelicalism more broadly has been focused on just a few issues like abortion and gay marriage. Hasn't focused historically a lot on the broader issues that deal with how sin has affected the world. We need to be speaking about brokenness wherever it is, right? as far as the curse is found. That's what we speak into. We don't pick a list of 3. We speak about it everywhere. Why? Why? Because it's God's world. He cares about everything. And all things are being reconciled to Christ. So we care about everything. We talk about it all. Right? There have been, of course, 2 sad trajectories. One is that the church has continued to relegate her social responsibility to institutions that aren't best at serving the needs of people in certain ways. We've also had the expansion of the state in ways that it attempts to help people do the things that historically and traditionally churches used to do. Right? For example, if you look at some of the policies, this came out in the New Yorker. If you go to YouTube, for example, and Google, I'm in this little documentary called "How Not to Help the Poor." Right? It's on YouTube. Just a few minutes. And one of the things that we've seen over the years is that a lot of the government programs that came out of the War on Poverty initiatives in the late 1960s have actually hurt the black community more than it's helped. Right? It's just historically. In the late 90s, the New Yorker magazine came out with this article that actually traced all of the programs that came out of LBJ in the early, traced them all, and demonstrated that not a single one made any urban area anywhere in America any better at all. Right? One of the things that Aid to Families with Dependent Children, AFDC, did is it ruined black families. Ruined it. Right? Some of the government programs pushed the church out of some social services. So, for example, you have to think about this economically. Where'd she go? Oh, you're back there. Okay. You have to think about this economically, right? In terms of the roles of incentives, right? What's going to provide incentives for humane behavior? What is going to provide disincentives for people to act irresponsibly? So when you have government programs that do this, they tell you they'll provide you assistance, but if you open a savings account, you get kicked off. So what does that teach you? Don't save money. If marriage is actually penalized, you won't get married. If you're given more and more money for having more and more kids, but you're not held accountable to that, you'll end up having more kids. If you're actually not held accountable in terms of education standards and you socially promote, that's what you'll do, right? So some of those programs actually made it worse, right? Why would a man take care of his own children when someone else will? Why get married? Why save money? I mean, if you're going to get kicked off of welfare because you get married, why are you going to get married? Some of those programs just haven't helped. Things like the minimum wage, for example. Also, creates conditions where it puts the truly disadvantaged at even more of a disadvantage, right? Because you remove the incentive for employers to take a risk with low-skilled labor and pay them what the job is actually worth, right? When you inflate the cost of the employer has to find a way to get that money. And they're either going to do two things with it, right? Raise the price of their product, which means we don't shop there, right? Or they reduce their largest expenditure, which is people, their labor costs. So you just get rid of people or not hire them. So one of the things that we've seen is as the minimum wages increase, and PJ can talk more about this than I can. But as the minimum wage has increased, it's not an accident that we've seen increases in teenage unemployment, and we've seen increases in unemployment at the low-skilled labor market level. Right? So now, if you're 16, you're not working at McDonald's. You're just not. Right? Because someone 53 years old has your job. Right? Because, listen, if they're going to pay somebody $9 an hour to drop some fries, they're not going to take a risk on a potential maybe punk that might show up late half the time. Right? So some of those programs intended to help didn't think about the long-term consequences of incentives and actually made matters worse for people than improving them. So in 1996, they scrapped AFDC and created Temporary Aid to Needy Families, TANF, which put families on a 60-month notice. You don't get it together, you're on the street. Okay? And what happened? Child unemployment, child poverty plummeted. Unemployment went down. It was all these things that people thought were not going to happen actually happened, and there was great improvement until the economy crashed. But that's a really important question when we're thinking about policies and justice related to what I laid out in terms of human dignity. What's going to provide incentives for people to behave in ways that enhance their dignity and the dignity of others? And that requires long-term thinking, not just immediate short-term thinking, but long-term thinking. That's economic thinking, which I like. Great. Well, thank you very much. I think we're done. There's a great book on this, on the role of incentives in economics and justice and these things, by Victor Clare and Robin Clay. It's called Economics and Christian Perspectives, if you haven't read that.